Christopher Columbus wrote this in his own journal on the very day he first met the people of this island. "They do not bear arms, they have no iron, they would make fine servants. With 50 men," he wrote, "we could subjugate them all and make them do whatever we want." That was October 12th, 1492. He was describing the Taino people of the Caribbean. Within 60 years, the population he met would fall from several hundred thousand to under 500. This is the voyage every calendar in the Western Hemisphere still marks, and the argument, more than 5 centuries later, over what exactly it began. In April 1492, Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand of Castile signed the Capitulations of Santa Fe, granting a Genoese navigator named Christopher Columbus the titles of Admiral, Viceroy, and Governor of any lands he found, plus a tenth of whatever wealth he brought back. He sailed that August with 3 ships and reached an island in the Bahamas on October 12th, making first contact with the Taino people who lived there. Spain went on to colonize the Caribbean and eventually most of 2 continents. Within decades, the indigenous population of Hispaniola alone collapsed by more than 99% from disease, forced labor, and violence. In 1500, Spain's own crown-appointed investigator arrested Columbus for his conduct as governor and shipped him back to Castile in chains. Every fact in that paragraph is documented and undisputed. What it means, a discovery, an encounter, an invasion, a genocide, is not. 1492, the same year Granada falls, ending centuries of Muslim rule in Spain, and Jews are expelled under the Alhambra Decree. Columbus makes landfall in the Caribbean. 1493, on his second voyage, he begins requiring Taino tribute in gold. 1495, unable to meet impossible quotas, Taino people are punished, and Columbus ships hundreds to Spain to be sold into slavery. By 1500, colonial administrator Francisco de Bobadilla arrests Columbus over reports of brutality and sends him home in irons. Spanish colonization expands across the Americas over the following century. In 1892, the United States marks the 400th anniversary with its first official Columbus Day. It becomes a federal holiday in 1937. In 1977, a United Nations-backed conference of indigenous delegates proposes reclaiming the date. In 1992, Berkeley, California becomes the first city to replace it with Indigenous Peoples Day. And in March 2026, Spain's King Felipe VI publicly acknowledges, for the first time from the throne itself, that the conquest involved, in his words, much abuse. Spain's case starts by insisting on precision. 1492 was not a Spanish national project in any modern sense. Spain, as a unified state, barely existed yet. It was a contract between the Crown of Castile and a foreign navigator, and Spanish law at the time, however poorly enforced, nominally required the protection of indigenous people, a fact Spain's own defenders point to as evidence of intent, even as they concede the intent routinely failed in practice. Spain's national holiday on October 12th isn't legally called a Discovery Day at all. Since 1987, its official name is simply Spain's National Day, framed by law around linguistic and cultural projection, not conquest. Spain's sharpest counter-argument is what it calls the Leyenda Negra, the Black Legend, the claim that its colonial record was singled out for exceptional condemnation by rival European powers, England and the Dutch Republic, who seized on the writings of a Spanish priest critical of the colonies and weaponized them for their own propaganda, while quietly running comparably brutal empires of their own. That Spanish priest, Bartolome de las Casas, is telling. Spain's own institutions treat him not as a foreign critic, but as an internal conscience, publishing his 1552 account of colonial atrocities under the same Royal Academy that today represents the Spanish state. The countercase starts with the Taino people Columbus actually met, whose population on Hispaniola is estimated to have fallen from perhaps 300,000 to 400,000 before contact under 500 within 60 years, a collapse driven by disease, but also by a forced labor tribute system Columbus personally instituted, demanding gold from every adult under threat of punishment. His own ship's journal, in his own words, described the Taino as ideal future servants before a single shot was fired. The Taino people have living descendants today, organized under groups like the United Confederation of Taino people, whose leadership has called Columbus Day, in their words, simply a celebration of genocide. But there is no single indigenous position. The movement to rename the holiday, which began at a 1977 UN-backed conference and became official policy in Berkeley in 1992, is now observed in some form in 18 U.S. states. For some advocates, that renaming is itself the point, a matter of truth and recognition. For others, including the historic American Indian movement, the holiday is a minor symptom of a larger, unresolved argument over land and treaty rights that a renamed day does nothing to settle. This is the first dispute in this series where one side has a government, an archive, and a foreign ministry, and the other doesn't. Spain can issue a royal statement. The Taino cannot issue anything with the same institutional weight because the nation that might have spoken for them didn't survive long enough to build one. Even the shape of the counter-argument reflects this. Canada's reckoning centers a different history entirely, its residential school system, observed on a different day. Venezuela renamed October 12th Fifth Day of Indigenous Resistance in 2002. Most of Latin America still calls it Dia de la Raza. There is no single capital, no single spokesperson, no single date even on the other side of this argument, because the disruption of 1492 didn't just take land. In many places, it took the very structures that would have let a people answer back with one voice. Every dispute in this series has had two sides, each with a government able to state its case in its own words, 5 centuries later, if necessary. This one doesn't, not evenly. Spain has archives, a foreign ministry, a king who can choose his words on camera. The people Columbus first described in his own journal left behind mostly the words others wrote about them, and a population too diminished, too fast, to build the kind of institution that gets to answer back on equal footing. Maybe the real asymmetry in any historical dispute isn't just who was right. It's who still has someone left to argue the case at all. A voyage that connected 2 hemispheres and started an argument that still doesn't have 2 equal sides to it. Next time, we go somewhere with plenty of survivors on every side to argue. The Vietnam War and the conflict that 5 different countries still remember 5 different ways. See you then.